Good afternoon, my brothers and sisters. This is Father Jose again. I am here once again for the Idaho Educators Conference. That this year they asked me to give two talks regarding the two different topics. Right now, the topic that I'd like to share with you is the topic about morality and ethics. Those are two words that sound familiar or perhaps sound very similar, but certainly have some different meaning. And morality is certainly a topic that, for me, was very much well taught in the seminary when I went to study in Mount Angel Seminary by a professor that is now long deceased, but he was a very good professor of morality. His name, I'm just going to mention his first name. His name was Father Jerome. He was a very good teacher I had for morality. He took a whole year of morality, and morality at that time in Mount Angel was one of the hardest classes that for a seminarian to take, but also one of the most fundamental classes to have about to have ready and to know before ordination, because this is something that we as priests are called to live a moral life, but also to instill in others that desire and that love and that way of life to live in a moral life. So morality is very important in the life of the church. So first of all, I think that the first thing that can be said about this is that we have to ascertain whether there is, either the whole notion of good or evil, if there's good or evil in the world. This is something that we first have to establish, because there are good moral acts and there's more evil moral acts, and certainly some people who do not want to even acknowledge that there's an existence of good or there's an existence of evil. Or perhaps even an existence of reality. This is what we call the nihilist. The nihilists are the people that are actually denied the existence of reality, that everything is an illusion, that everything's an apparent, but it's apparently there, but it's not really there, and that there is no such thing as good or evil. There's just not even a reality. This is kind of like going to the stream of doubting someone own's existence or the existence of others as mere illusions in that regard. So nihilists really don't have they've denied all reality and anything within that reality, which is good or evil. Then we have another thing that is very pressing, and that is the another ism, and that is relativism. Relativism is basically saying that the morality is probably contingent on what you think and what you are feeling, and what is good for you is good, and what is good for me is good. And I think that's basically in the society that we're living in, is like we don't want to push anyone's buttons, and we don't want to get in altercations, and you know what, let's agree to disagree, and basically you're right, I'm right, we're all right, and what is right for you, that's your way of life, and I'm not going to mess with it, but don't mess with my own way of life. There's no truth. Truth is in the eye of the beholder, and truth is in the eye of the agent. That is saying, yeah, this is my truth, and this is like the way that I live by, and leave me alone, and you can live in your own way, and I'll leave you alone. So relativism is like basically a type of everybody makes other ones feel good, but they are not living according to the truth. So that is something that Pope Benedict, when he was still basically before he was elected Pope Benedict the 16th, Joseph Ratzinger says that that's something, the greatest ill of our time is relativism that is creeping in the world, and we have seen this many a times that people says I am not going. Everybody can live whatever they want to live. I'm not going to meddle in their affairs, but don't meddle in my own affairs. So relativism is really a commodity type of um, you could put it movement that is like everybody is comfortable in their own way, and that is a danger, because there is truth, and truth is subjective, and there is good and there is evil, and it's not what I say, or it is what has been revealed. So that's another ism that we have to be very careful as we are approaching this talk of morality, to not fall into the pitfall of relativism. The other ism that is certainly that affects the way that we live a moral life, doing good and avoiding doing evil, is atheism. Atheism is another another one that is really out there, that is telling us that, there's no God, and God is not the originator or the creator or the delegator of morality. So there's no focal point. And so, you know, it's not that atheists are not amoral people, that they don't believe in morality at all, but um, for us Christians, there's such thing as Christian morality. We based our decisions on our faith in the person of Christ. And so basically, the atheists, they remove God from the equation, and there are people that try to be good, and we can put it in that way, atheists that are trying to be good people. They just don't believe in God, and that really is removing a central uh, component to why be moral, of morality in the lives of the people. When you remove God from the moral imperative, then certainly that's a big vacuum that is very hard to um, to fill. Why we moral? That's a question that perhaps the atheists have the difficulties answering. Why we moral? We Christians believe why we moral, because we believe in Christ, and because that's the commandments. Love, the great commandment that the Lord gave us, to love one another as I have loved you. But for them who are atheists, it is really difficult to justify their moral system, uh, void from any God in that system. But certainly, I would say that that is something that affects a lot the morality as well. Is that if people don't believe in there's a God, they probably won't. Some of them may not believe there's good or evil, but I just hate to say that all atheists are amoral people, because that I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't dare to say in that regard. But their system morality is really much limited, perhaps affected by the absence of God within this moral system, in their moral system. So that's another ism that certainly is that is very much affects if people are moral or not moral in their life, if they believe in good or evil in their lives. Then we continue with isms. The isms are a lot. I think that from the beginning of time, I think this has been the problem. That is that there has always been some factor, some excuse, something that human beings want to cling to, so that not to live a moral life, or not to have a system of morality in their lives. So there's always those isms and that affect the way that we live our moral life. So another ism is the ism that we see um, that we see also many philosophers really also basically also adhere to this system, and that's utilitarism. Utilitarianism. I think I'm pronouncing that a little bit, with my limited English, but I am pronouncing it perhaps a little bit wrong. But it's utilitarian. It's hard for me to pronounce it. I'm glad, because I don't want to ascribe by that type of ism. Uh, it comes from the word utility. That a person has value if they have utility. That's basically what that ism is. And basically, I treat you as a human being, and I give you respect if you have some utility for me. If you provide something that is good and beneficial, then you are, and if you are, if you provide a good for the greatest amount of people, then you are, then you're okay. But if your value is not really good, if you don't serve a purpose for society. So it's really sad that some people, are seeing that that way. The life they're living is that they are basically they only use people rather than to value people for their dignity as human beings. And because they are created by God, they are more, they're people they are using them for their own means, and that's utilitarian. So, and that certainly is not a good way to live a good moral life either, because people should not be means to an end. These people should not be used as a stepping stones. We can put it in that way, and even I wouldn't even use that image of stepping stone, because that sounds like a good image. Stepping, but this is like stepping down on the dignity of a human person, and that certainly is not a good way to live life. But some people have that ism in their life, that they are utilitarians. They basically are they are basically living using people as a means to an end, rather than seeing the dignity of the human being. So that's another ism. And the isms continue to go on. I think there are many more isms that we need to avoid. One last one. I think that this will be a good one to continue on with this talk about morality, what it means to be good, or doing good or doing evil in our lives. Where's the balance? But I think that overall, this last ism that I will mention is certainly an ism that it's very predominant and very dangerous, because I think that many of us, perhaps in one way or another, have adhered to this ism in our lives, and that is proportionalism. Now, that is, I think I'm pronouncing a little bit better, proportionalism. And I think this is spoken about in the encyclical of Pope John Paul II, that is called Veritatis Splendor. If you want to learn more about how to be a good moral person, I think that would be a good encyclical to reference, and that is called Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of truth. This is what we're talking about at the beginning, is that some people do not want to deny there's good or evil in the world, and make it relative, and make it and reduce it, and so forth. But there is truth, and there is a moral law and order given to us. But certainly, one of the isms that is prevalent, that we're talking about, is that proportionalism, and that is that and that is not denying whether the truth, whether there is evil or good. But proportionalism is more about saying, you know, as long as that as I was good for most of my life, maybe I did a couple of evil things along the way, but if put everything in a scale, everything, if I did more good, if there was more good proportional to my evil deeds that I did, maybe I did a couple of big ones over here, evil deeds, but if I did many good deeds over here, and overall, if I did more of this, more of good deeds, and less of the evil deeds, then I was a very good person, and I would be saved, because it's not, God will not take into account all the single little sins that I've done, all the things all the deviations that I had. But God will take into account only, He will look into the overall grand picture and say, this guy did more good things than bad things. So I think that he was more good than bad. So okay, we'll let him pass. We'll let him enter. We'll let him go into heaven. And so basically, then basically that is the way of thinking about proportionalism, and that certainly is not church teaching, and that would not be something that we want to promote. But I think, like I mentioned, I think that many of us perhaps have been in that situation where we have adhered to that. Well, I did this, I did this bad thing, but I'm kind of like a good person. I consider myself a good person. But one of the things about I keep reminding the people is that God doesn't call us to even be good. I mean, yes, be good, but calls us to something more than good, and that is be holy. He calls us to be holy in that way, which encompasses being a good moral person, of course, in that regard. But I think that holiness is something that we need to strive and in our lives, and we cannot be contented to say, well, I try to do a couple of good things here I went to Sunday a couple of masses and a couple of Sunday masses and a couple of times in a year and so forth. And but I had this other relationship here that was sinful, and well, I think that God will put everything in a balance and see what happens at the end. Well, that's not the way that that we should be living our lives. So that is called proportionalism. Proportionalism is basically saying in proportion to what I've done in life, I will be judged. And hopefully, if I did more good deeds and bad deeds, then I'll make it. But here's the thing: John Paul II, in his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, he said something very important, and that is that every single act of that the human person does counts. And it could be a good act or it can be an evil act, and every single one acts, and it can be a sinful act that is done in every single act that is sinful counts for and affects our eternal salvation. So we will be held accountable for every single act that we have done, not in general, not in proportion to what we've done, but every single act we will have to render into account. And there are mortal acts and venial acts. And that's the problem with proportionalism, is that it takes away that personal responsibility, and it takes away every single action I'm responsible for. And that's why that is also a danger when we're talking about morality, because it's not because what we're saying is that we are called to be moral people in every single action that we undertake. And we are held accountable for our actions and the effects that come after our actions or following our actions in that way. So that's why it's important to reject this one as well. But this one is one that is um, really difficult sometimes to overcome, because we want to give ourselves a little leeway when it comes to be moral people, and that it's a slippery slope. Now, another one. I think that this one was explained very well. Another one that is not an ism anymore, but is something that we need to keep in mind, as we are moral beings here. God calls us to do good and avoid doing evil. Again, we already established I would like to say that's what it means to be moral. And there are attacks to different from different perspectives, so that we don't have are we're not be, so that we don't become good moral agents. But here's the thing: there's one more, I think, but this is not an ism. But like I mentioned, this is the what we call the uh, I think, and I may be uh, I may be a little bit putting two two terms here together, um, but I think it's called a Pascal wager. It's a wager, and what I mean by that is that some people, this is how they live their life. Um, they're saying, "Well, I think that I will be a good moral person just in case that there is a God, and just in case there is a heaven, and just in case there's all these things that the church tells us and that the people tell us, um, then just in case, I would like to be a I would be I try to be a good person, but I really don't know if that's the case that's going to happen. If we're really going to be saved, if there's really a savior, if there's really a heaven. I'm just covering my bases. We can put it in that way, and I'm just trying to, you know, uh, play a little bit of insurance here, in a sense, and basically saying I'm wagering too, in a sense, and I so to see if this works, if being a good moral agent works at the end, well, that in itself is not a good way to live life, and I think that's also rejected as well. In a sense, we should have the conviction of our morals, and maybe the other way to put it too, we should have the morals of our convictions. I don't know which one makes more sense, but I think it does make sense that we should be convinced of what we're doing as moral agents in this world, and not be wishy-washy, and not be like, oh, just in case, We need to have convictions, moral convictions of saying this is what is right. I believe this. This is true. This is something that I know to be true. So and I'm living a good moral life because I know that at the end of my life I will be held accountable for what I've done and what I have not done. I mean, we always have a reference to that in the Confiteor, for we say that I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, and that I have sinned through my own folly, my thoughts, and what I have done and what I have failed to do. So basically, we will be held accountable, and and so it's not. We should do it because we have faith in God, and not and we want to live a good life here on earth and prepare a whole life in our here on earth because we are looking forward into our eternal life. And so this ism apparently it says, well, we cover our bases, but it's kind of like a little weak, we can put it in that way, like a little um I don't know, wishy-washy, we can put it in that way, type of way of living life, just in case, you never have this type of people never have convictions or that strong faith that is needed in this world. And so that's another danger that we may fall into. So we are called to be moral people. We're called to be moral people in our lives, avoid doing evil and do good for others. But the question I think then the next question is why? Why be moral people? Well, I already been talking about this. I've been talking about why be moral people, and it's because we, as Christians, we have an incentive. We can put it in this way. We have a purpose. We have a goal, and that is that we want to achieve our salvation, and we want to be saved through living a good moral life. I think that's the main reason. I think why we moral because we want to achieve our salvation. When we were baptized, we were given that calling from our baptism that we should be good moral people to so that we were made children of God, but we needed to walk day by day in that light of Christ. We need to be, as he mentions, to remain, uh, retain our dignity and stain until the end of times. And we needed to not just leave our baptism unused or forgotten, but live our baptism and live in a good moral life, not an immoral life, but a moral life. Jesus taught us, he gave us an example, he showed us the way, he gave us the Beatitudes, he gave us the commandments, he gave us the great commandment, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And and he gave us the commandment is love one another as I have loved you. So all of this is a moral way of life that we are called to live as we are in this world. In this world, we are Christians, and we have an objective, and that is to return to the Father, to return to the Lord, to return to God, and that's what we call exitus reditus, which means we came from God. We need to return to God, to be at that homeland, to be at that place, to be at heaven, to be in the presence of God for all eternity. That is the greatest joy. That is the greatest thing that we can strive to. And that's why we are moral, because we understand that sinfulness cannot enter into the presence of God. We understand that we will have to render into an account. In fact, this is what the letters are telling us. In the letters of St. Paul tells us and the letter of the Hebrews also says we need to render an account for what we done. This life is not meant to be misused. This life is meant to be applied well so that we may have that recompense of the eternal life. So I think that's what it means, why I think the why to be moral. But again, as I mentioned, and I tie everything together, I think that there has been a lot of, uh, and that's why the world is not wanting this. Is the devil is working very much in the world and not want us to be moral people. So morality is basically that is what I would describe morality as the trying to do good and avoid doing evil for the sake of our salvation. Okay, so that is, I think, a quick summary of what I think about morality. Well, not only what I think, what I've learned about morality and what I've researched about morality, and also, as I mentioned, very, very good professor I had um, with um, with the with the in theology, that was really, really good professor in theology, that was that really inspired me. And I read many books about morality, and he was a tough professor, and so we did read a lot of books about morality, and that's what we want to provide. I wanted to provide to you about that, the 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 different topics about morality. Okay, the different isms about morality. Okay, so now let's move on to ethics. Wow, ethics. Okay, ethical behavior. Basically, that's another one too. How to conduct ourselves in a dignified, in a in a dignified and a respectful, I think, in a safe, and we can also put it in a professional way. That's, I think, ethics as well. So we already established there's good and evil, but now we have to have some we also say some ethical behavior that is very important for us to adhere as ministers in the life of the church. This is something that we do, that we need to have as we are in the life of the church. And I think that I also learn a lot from ethical behavior. Basically, for anyone who wants to learn more about how we are conduct ourselves in this, as ministers in the life of the church in Idaho, just go make a reference to the sexual and misconduct policies of the Diocese of Boise. I mean, that is basically telling us that those are the things that we need to adhere. And I think that also the policies that we need to adhere, and that's, we all sign up in that document saying that this is something that we are aware, and then we need to adhere to the policies of the Diocese of Boise. But so that's a good. I would say that would be a good document to read along before, even considering ministering in the Diocese of Boise. And as we are starting to minister in the Diocese of Boise, that needs to be reviewed, because sometimes, we get those documents and we just skim through them and we don't really look into them as much as we can, but we need to actually understand them and we need to abide by them. So ethical behavior is basically, having a professional conduct in whatever setting that you are, in a good, we say, good conduct with respect, with dignity, with decorum, and all of the things that are proper, and abiding, excuse me, by the rules of conduct of society too, but also in the workplace, and also in just a general, we would say, a general type of a environment, that there are things that we know, that are legal, and things that are illegal, and things that are proper and things that are improper, things that are things that, that are a proper way of conducting business or conducting life, relating to one another, and other things that are can be considered as harassment, intimidation, and other things that are not ethical, that are unethical in the way that we treat others, in the way that we are able to relate with others. So that's what we need to learn: ethical behavior, and not only learn, but want apply it in our daily settings, whatever settings we find ourselves. So, and I think one of the reference that I would like to give here, and like I mentioned, this was also very, I learned this more so from where I took another class in theology, again from Mount Angel, and I learned this from one of the classes in that I was also not, this was not morality, but this was more clinical psychology, and pastoral ministry, and pastoral ethics. And I learned that, and one of the authors that I really have invested a lot of time and research a lot of time, his name is Father Richard Gula. I would encourage you to look him up. I think he's still living. Maybe he's up there a couple of years in years, but he has been a pioneer and a foundational person about pastoral ethics, professional conduct that we need to have in our parishes. If we talk about ethics and applying them in our parishes, they go hand in hand. We need to have ethical behavior as we are in in a parish or in a ministry or in a school. All of the settings that we are entrusted with other people, we need to have ethical behavior. And Father Gula, Richard Gula is the name. He gives us wonderful examples. I don't know if the word wonderful would be the best way to put it. Very powerful, I would say, powerful examples to dwell in the different books that he writes. So I read three of his books, and I'm going to share them the titles with you. This is so that you may look them up because that really shows a lot. Gives us a good foundation um, that for acting in an ethical way. The first work is Pastoral Ethics, and that in itself, that's the name of the title. Pastoral Ethics by Father Richard Gulick. Gula. I'm sorry, Gula. And then the second book is Just Ministry, and in this one, Just Ministry, um, and it is Just, just, and so I think it's a little play on words here, Just Ministry, but it can also mean just like only ministry, but no, this is just ministry, meaning to say justice, it meaning to say, a just person will apply all these principles in the ministry. And so that is a wonderful book to read as well, Just Ministry, and that gives us every chapter. Father gives us a couple of examples that, and then he illustrates that the principles that he wants to illustrate based on those examples that he gives us at the beginning of the chapter. And the third book that I will also recommend to you to read, and maybe skim through that because it's a very powerful book as well. Reason Informed by Faith. Reason Informed by Faith. And that is also another book for Father Gould. I think that's one of the earliest books, and then after that comes the other books that I mentioned, Pastoral Ethics, and also the other one, Just Ministry. They're a little later than the last one I mentioned, which is Reason Informed by Faith. But all of them are very good books from Father Gula, Richard Gula. He is a very good, uh, a, a very good moral author and pastoral ethics author, and many of the principles I've learned they come from these books. I did a research in my thesis that I was working for my doctorate, and I used extensively from these three books. He has a lot of good, um, good thoughts to offer. One of those thoughts that he offers is the thought of what I that and this applies in ethics, in our ethical behavior toward others, and how we are conduct ourselves in ministry in parish settings and pastoral work. He talks about basically the um, the term, and he coins this term, fiduciary trust, fiduciary trust, and that is one term that he uses, or another term that is the same term, but the wording is different depending on the book that you're reading. I learned it as fiduciary trust, that we always have to keep fiduciary trust, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other word that is used for that word is fiduciary responsibility. And I think there is the same word. It's the same concept. It's just different wording, and I think different versions of that same concept. But both of them use the word fiduciary. I remember as fiduciary trust, but the latest book, Just Ministry, talks about fiduciary responsibility. And what does that mean? Well, the first word is the same. Fiduciary, basically, I think it comes from the term, like when in the ancient times when there was the feudal lords that were responsible for their subjects. They were responsible for the people that lived under the kingdom. And so uh, they were feudal lords, or the kings were, and they had a responsibility. Now, this notion of absolute monarchy was something that came on later in history, and but and it was part of history, and it was part for a long time. There were absolute monarchs. Now there's very few absolute monarchs in the world, but before there used to be absolute monarchs. But even those that were absolute monarchs, and even before that, the kings, they had a responsibility for the people. The Bible envisions the kings to not be like lords that are, that are subjecting and suppressing the people, but following the example of our Lord Jesus Christ. The kings were supposed to be servants, and in fact, that's what we in our baptism. That is what we are reminded, that we are called to be servants of the Lord, and so we're called to be prophets, uh, priests, and kings, but kings in the sense of service. And so I'm going into the explanation about this because the term fiduciary kind of comes from, I think maybe it would have the root from being a feudal, um, uh, from that feudal type of system. But that feudal system was basically saying even the Lord had some responsibilities that needed to be fulfilled, to their people, for their people. Even a king who was strong and mighty had some responsibilities that need to be done for the people. And the image of serving, the king should be serving the people rather than uh, being self-serving of the people. They just serving, and so that, or self-serving, and not serving the people. So all of these things is basically an example um, of that interaction. Now, that that can be done between a king and his people. Now, we're not kings, and that's the first thing we have to be very reminded. And some people think they're royalty while they're serving the church. We need to avoid that type of mentality in the life of the church. Some of the people that are servants, they certainly they have little of servants and a lot of your lordship, and they think that they they deserve everything, and that they own everything, and that they can do everything, and that is not conducive to service, and that is not what the church needs it as for their ministers, or for their people that are supposedly serving in the life of the church. So we understand then, the fiduciary responsibility is about, uh, you know, in a sense, people are entrusted to us. We're not lords, we're not kings, and perhaps that's the downside of using that term fiduciary. But we're not lords, we're not kings, but people are entrusted to us. People are entrusted, and people entrust us with their journey of life, and we need to be able to not defraud, to not let them down, to not disappoint, to not take advantage of that trust that they give us, but rather to be good servants, and good guardians, and respond in a good way, and be people of good faith, a good and a good conduct. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, because and that is what is called fiduciary trust. We first have to understand that in a pastoral relationship there's an inequality. There's an inequality because the people that are come for the service and the people that provide the service, they're not in the same equal standing, because the people of the service who come to search for this service, they come because they're vulnerable, because they need help, because they trust us that we will be able to render a good service to them. And those that are in servants may have the knowledge, may have the ability to help those that need the service, but because they're not in the same level of playing field, we can put it in that way. Um, the people that are serving have a special responsibility for those that are come to be served. They cannot abuse their power. They cannot abuse their confidence. They cannot abuse the people that come for the service. They need to be able to act in a very professional manner. So fiduciary responsibility or fiduciary trust. Basically, what it's telling to basically this is the whole notion that the doctors they the doctors they say do no harm. That's what the the oath is, or part of the oath is, do no harm. And that's the same thing that it happened. That's kind of like an example that can be applied also as well in the life of the church. Those that are serving in the life of the church should do no harm to those that are attending, to those that are coming to the life of the church, that are part of the church, in the church of the Lord. So do no harm. That's very important. Fiduciary responsibility. Fiduciary responsibility means that we owe to the people that we conduct ourselves with the highest levels of conduct, that we hold ourselves to a high standard, that we hold ourselves accountable and say for whatever was given to us to serve, we will not misuse it, we will not abuse it, and we will carry out our responsibilities in a dignified and in a professional manner. And that is part of being ethical, being having the ethical responsibility, but ethical conduct. And being ethical means having boundaries. That's what it also is. Fiduciary trust is basically a responsibility, is that it is that that term boundaries go hand in hand with this other term, fiduciary responsibility, because that is something that we need to also that we need to talk about, and that is that boundaries are very necessary in an ethical environment. Boundaries, what I mean by the boundaries, and I think this is not going to become a safe environment training, but that is basically what the safe environment training I've been training doing train I've been training the people in the safe environment training from the Diocese of Boise, and it's very extensive about things that we can and cannot do in the life of the church. But it's basically telling us we need to avoid breaking and violating boundaries. What does it mean by this? Boundaries. To keep boundaries, basically, respect the people, love the people, respect the people, do no harm to the people. This is, again, this is applying the same terms here, but boundaries is basically saying there has to be professional boundaries that cannot be let down as ministers. The people of God do not want they are not to be harmed, but the people of God also, they do not need a friend. Okay, this is important. Maybe this sounds a little harsh, but the people of God do not need a friend. They need a professional minister. Okay, and we're talking here about minister in the broadest term of the word. Not only church, not only priests, but also DREs, but also school principals, but also teachers, but also Eucharistic ministers, but also lectors, but also the parish secretaries, but also, and all the people that work in pastoral ministry, ministers. You know, they don't. That's what they need: professional, not a friend. Okay, not a buddy. Not a buddy that, the line, the boundaries start to break apart. The boundaries start to blur in this regard. Let me give you an example about this. It's like, this is like, this is actually happening in real life, and I'm not going to say with who, or when or why, or how, or who. I'm just going to say in general, but it has happened. That uh, the priest wants to be, well loved by the people, and he wants to have, they don't want them to be like the rigid Father Jose, but they want him to be more like, easygoing and type of whatever. No, they wanted an easy type of going. So this happened, after a while, um, you know that. we see that what one incident happened is like, oh, they went to a restaurant, and and the priest starts, you know, joking around with not the proper decorum and not the proper way of relating to people, bring some of the people that and starts drinking, and it's karaoke night, so let's now uh, sing karaoke, and a couple of drinks along the way, because the party is getting good, and it's getting started, and one drink and two drinks, and the priest is now, you know basically wavering, and we can put it wavering, or more so stumbling along, and singing a good song too, they're in the karaoke, uh but then at the end of the party, we can put it at the end of the gathering, they have to carry father to the car, and make sure that father's okay to drive, because father had maybe had many too much to drink. Now that is a break there totally of these boundaries. Is like the priest is not like a we can put it in that way. It's not like an angel. We can put it in that way. It is not like, like the priest has a life, and the priest has a right. We can put it in that way of to have fun, but in a good way. When boundaries are broken, then that is something that that we need to be aware. When the priest is creating scandal, we can put it in that way, because of the behavior, excessive behavior, and is starting to treat other people like, uh, and that is disrespectful. Then that is a break of boundaries, and that's where, we have to put a limit. We cannot go over the line, and because that is breaking a boundary. And especially, when it comes in, I don't know, perhaps in in English is a little bit more uh different than in Spanish. There in Spanish, there's some words that 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 sometimes are perhaps should not be used by a person that has a proper way of talking and conducting themselves. And so when if you see a priest that is starting to use those words and stuff like that, then you really start thinking, well, father is probably getting you know going overboard with this, and his behavior should not be in that regard. Let me give you give me one example that where I don't know if about uh, where it's a little bit more um, difficult in this regard. Okay, so you have a priest, another priest. Okay, I'm talking about priests. You have a priest, and the priest decides that is gonna is going to go to to a casino. Okay, go to casino, and then you see the father of the casino. He's like, oh my goodness, what is the father doing in the casino? Is he gambling away the parish, or he's gambling away the collection from last Sunday? There's always those jokes about the priest and um and the priest and in the parish, and taking the money from the um from the collection basket. Well, that's another story there. The priest has their own money, and they don't have to go and gamble the parish assets and stuff like that. So if you see a priest in a casino, it's not like, oh, this is the end of the world. But and one should not be so basically so um jumping into conclusions. Oh, they are spending the parish money. So that is a case about that is not that sometimes is not you know ethically bad, but I mean, for a priest to go to a casino and see him there, I think that it depends on the circumstances, but sometimes it can happen that way. You know, it can happen that way. Recently, someone was telling me, I went to a casino with a couple of friends that are good friends, lifelong friends. We had a good time. We came back. We did everything was good, and so there is something that, in that regard, in that example, that we have to be very guarded and careful about, that we don't jump into conclusions. But one of the things, now this one is actually a very clear cut. I'm talking about being professional, ethical. One of the problems, and this is one of the things that I've heard in the parish. Not sorry, not in the parish. Well, I heard in the school when I was going to school in the seminary. They told us this that the next big thing in the Catholic Church, the next big scandal in the Catholic Church, will be not. We already had one. We understand that, and that is again a break in. This is unethical behavior, immoral behavior, in the sexual abuse of children that happen in the life of the church and continues to happen, unfortunately. And we hopefully we have things that prevent it from happening in our diocese and in our church. But there are cases that still continue to happen and continue to happen along the way. But here's the thing. So that is certainly unethical, immoral behavior, and and that has been a great scandal in the life of the church and continue to be and will be for I think the rest of our existence. But here's the thing. Another scandal, another break in ethical behavior, and ethical behavior that calls us to do good and avoid doing evil, but ethical behavior that calls us to have a good, proper conduct in the life of the church. Um, this another break is, and this is the next the what they mentioned would be the next big scandal, and that is embezzlement. Embezzlement in the life of the church. That is going to be that's what they mentioned. It will be the next great scandal in the life of the church because it has happened before. We were talking about, that some people jokingly say, father is taking the money and playing the casino. Well, that may not be the case, but that may be a case that maybe sometimes it happened in one diocese in one parish. But it has happened that in parishes they had been some cases of embezzlement, that people have taken money from not maybe the collection basket, but from the account of the parish and spend it in things that were not parish related, and little by little, and they spend it in they took away for they wrote checks and took away the funds little by little, and so that is a scandal. But one of the great things I appreciate a lot. I really do appreciate. I was in the parish, and excuse me, I was in the parish, and I think I can say this because this is a level for me of appreciation. Uh, in one of my previous parishes, now maybe I wouldn't say the name, but they had a very good bookkeeper, and it was very very good that to that there were good controls there, there were good receipts, and everything was in order, and that was very good that I was able to receive that from my first years of training as a priest. Honesty has always been something that and when it comes to the money, we be very much honest, and you know many are my vices, but you know taking money from the parish is not one of them. So basically I would say that my conscience is at peace with that. But I also feel that I'm at peace because I understand that many of the dioceses, many of the parishes, the diocese of Boise, the parishes that I've been, have very good controls about the money in that regard. And it's very very comforting to know that the money the parishioners is been well protected. And so, but this happens. Embezzlement happens, and there are churches, and there have been cases in our diocese as well, that where maybe there have been some priests that had been embezzling, or the parish secretary had been embezzling in that regard. And maybe not only in this diocese but in other dioceses that it happens in that way. So we need to be guarded, that we never engage in any type of financial impropriety, because that is a break in ethical behavior. So there are a couple of breaks in ethical behavior we've been talking about in the last couple of minutes. We talked about ethical that the ethical break make ethical behavior is when we break boundaries. We talk about that. A break in ethical behavior is when it comes with embezzlement, and embezzlement, that's in breaking ethical behavior. Harassment in the workplace, that's a different that's also another one that we need to be careful. And then ethical behavior is dishonesty, and basically everything and also everything that comes with sexual impropriety. And what it comes to what would also say, there's relationships that are in improper relationships with both men and women. And And that is something that also it can be a danger in the life of the church, and can be something that we need to avoid by always keeping a professional conduct in the with the people of God. Let me the faithful. We need to respect the wives of the people of the parishioners. This is important, and but this is also for all ministers too. The youth minister, they need to respect the wives of other people, and vice versa. If you're a female minister, you have to respect the husbands of other people, and so forth. You have to respect all God's people. What I mean by that is very important, because this is where this is the, the people that we have been entrusted, and we are called to respect them, and that is where we need to have the a good ethical behavior in our lives. That ethical behavior demands that we are guarded, that we are professional, that we're guarded with our eyes, that we are not looking in an evil way and at anyone, but rather always having a good uh, semblance, and a good posture, and a good involvement in the lives of the people, and in a professional manner. Having the when we, so basically, that it means that when we're out there, we're not trying to see if we can catch someone. We're not trying to see if we can who is going to be the our next conquest. No, this is not ethical behavior. This is unethical. And it can happen again, from the range of being the cleaning lady that comes in to clean the church, the custodian that comes in and takes care of the grounds, to the priest that is there, to the secretary, to whatever is there. If we are not guarded, and if we do not follow the procedures that are basically the procedures um, of the safe environment, and the procedures of being ethical in our lives. Again, I make reference to you to go take a look into the sexual misconduct policy of the Diocese of Boise, and know and learn basically everything that is expected as for to adhere as ministers in the life of the church. So this is important in as we try to live an ethical life. So, my brothers and sisters, um, we are called to be ethical, to conduct ourselves in a good manner as we are serving God's people. We are serving God's people because we want to live a good moral life of service. This moral life is encompasses that we believe in good or in evil, and we believe that in the way that every action counts, and that at the end of our lives we'll be judged accordingly to what we did. If we did good, or we did or we did or we didn't good or we did evil in this world. And again, we have to remember that it's not going to be in a proportionalist style. It's not going to be about proportion. We will be judged for every single act that we have done in this world. If we have done things that are reprehensible and things that are sinful, we need to repent, and we need to ask for forgiveness, and we need to go to confession. And we also, if there's something that is we've done that is sinful and illegal at the same time, we would have to pay the consequences for our actions that that we have done, if that is the case. So basically, it would say for us, we it's good to live in a good moral life, because at the end we will be rendering into account. We live not for our own. We live not for our own designs. We live because we live for God, and we owe God an account for what we've done for our lives. And hopefully, at the end of our lives, we can say to God, I lived a good moral life, serving others in an ethical way. I want to thank you for again listening uh, to this video, and to all of you um, for enduring my workshop until the end. God bless you, and hopefully I will be able to see some of you as we are walking in this way toward God in ministry, serving in ministry. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful time, and I invite you to live well, to live a good life, so that at the end of life we may be admitted, and the doors of heaven may be open to us because we did live a good moral life.